I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make my gluten-free baked donuts. And these will be cake donuts today. When you're making gluten-free baked goods that you're trying to mimic what the original version is like, we have to make some adjustments. First of all, my donuts don't have any yeast in them. And of course, these are cake donuts, so they wouldn't be like a really light, puffy, yeasty donut anyways. If I were to make this dough, kind of like a traditional dough, where you would knead it a little bit and roll it out and cut it into donut shapes and then bake it on a cookie sheet, or I guess at that point you could deep fry it as well, you have to add a lot of extra flour, which then really changes the texture, it dries it out, and then you end up with a really dry, crumbly donut, and that's not what we're looking for. So that's where I find that these donut pans come in so handy. Then you don't have to add in any extra flour to your dough. You don't have to bother with rolling it out and possibly adding more flour in by rolling it out because it's kind of a sticky dough. And like with a lot of gluten-free things, it's not exactly a dough. It's more of a really thick batter. And because we've got baking powder in it to help give it that rise, it kind of looks like a biscuit dough. I do have all of my ingredients out at room temperature, and as you can see, there's really not a lot that goes into it either. So I've got two pans here, and I've buttered them with butter. Even though they are non-stick, the butter adds extra flavor and helps to get a crunchy outside on at least the bottom of the donut. And then I've got a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper and a cooling rack. You don't have to use the parchment paper, it's just for easy cleanup. When we go to glaze our donuts, well, first of all, we'll cool off our donuts on the cooling rack, but then when we go to glaze them, any of that excess will drip down. And then I've got a large pastry bag. I don't even have a tip in here. We're not trying to make any fancy designs. And then I've just got it in a cup here to make it easy to fill it up. You don't have to use a pastry bag. You could even use a Ziploc bag and cut off one of the corners. Or just use a spoon and spoon your batter into the pan. This just makes it a little bit faster and easier. And before we make the dough, I'm going to preheat my oven to 375. And because I'm making some of these donuts, coconut donuts today, I do have a frying pan over here with some coconut. And this is the really finely shredded coconut. You've seen me use this coconut before in other recipes. I really like this coconut. It's really small pieces, so you don't have to manage really big, long shredded pieces of coconut. It's also unsweetened. We'll be glazing some of our donuts, and then some of my donuts I'm going to be dipping into this coconut. But I do want to get it toasted first. Toasting the coconut makes it crunchy, gives it a nice flavor as well. I'm going to turn this on about medium heat, and I'm not toasting a lot of coconut today. I have a video here on my channel that I show you how to do a lot of coconut at once in a cookie sheet in the oven. But the small amount that I'm doing today, it goes faster and easier in a frying pan. And this is just a dry non-stick skillet. I know it looks like nothing's happening right now, but once it starts turning brown, it can go from golden brown to burnt really fast. So you really want to stir this constantly. Once your coconut is as toasted as you'd like it to be, I pour it into a bowl just so it doesn't keep cooking in this pan. So I'm just going to set this aside because we are not ready for it yet. So in this bowl I've got 4 tablespoons of butter. I do want it to be a lot softer than room temperature, somewhere between soft and melting. And that is what I'm looking for. Very soft, very melty. So set that aside. So in this bowl, I've got 3½ cups of my gluten-free flour mix. In this bowl, I have 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, ½ a teaspoon of cream of tartar, ½ a teaspoon of nutmeg, and ½ a teaspoon of salt. All in here. And then just give this a mix. It doesn't take very much at all. So these donuts are just kind of a vanilla nutmeg flavor. Not a whole lot of nutmeg is in here, so it's just a hint of nutmeg, but it's a really nice cake donut flavor. If you wanted to, instead of the vanilla, you could use some coconut extract. If you wanted to make these a more coconut flavored donut, you could use almond extract. You could put in some cinnamon, really whatever spices and seasoning you like to change the flavor of your donut. So now to my really soft butter, I'm going to add a half a cup of honey. You could add coconut sugar instead of honey if you wanted to keep going with your coconut flavored theme, which is really good, but I actually really like the honey in the dough of this recipe. And then just give this a really good mix. So once you've got your butter and your honey all mixed together, I've got 3 eggs. I've got 1 cup of kefir here. If you don't have or like kefir, you could substitute 1 cup of yogurt, 1 cup of sour cream. Traditionally, it would be buttermilk, but I really like how the kefir does what the buttermilk does. It gives it that same kind of tangy flavor. And this is plain, unsweetened, whole-fat kefir. I feel like it really works the best in this recipe. Of course, if you used a flavored kefir, it would change the flavor of your donut. That's up to you. And then I've got 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And these eggs, you don't really have to go one at a time. You can if you want to. There's our last egg. And I like to give these a little bit of a mix before I add in the kefir and the vanilla. Or you could just add in the vanilla now. And once that's all mixed around, pour in your kefir or buttermilk, whatever you're using. And then just give that a really good mix. If you were substituting yogurt or sour cream, your mixture would be a little bit thicker. And now that I've got that all mixed together, I'm going to dump in my dry ingredients all in one. And then just give this a really good stir. Scraping the bowl as you go. At this point, you could just plop it into your donut pan. But again, I really feel like a pastry bag makes fast and easy work of getting it in the donut pan. But the texture of this dough is almost like a biscuit dough. But it's really not something that you could manage rolling out even on a piece of parchment paper. Now that I've got it in my pastry bag, but just gently squeeze it down towards the tip, and then you want to get a really good twist at the top. Careful not to drip your filling out, and then just start filling up your donut pans. And we can go all the way to the top. And if you notice, when you're getting down to about halfway of your mixture here, don't do that. And then I just have a bowl scraper. It's so handy at pushing this dough down towards the tip of this bag. You don't want to waste any of your dough. And then I usually go back and make sure they're all about the same size. Okay, now that we've got our pans all filled up, I try to make them as even as possible. And even though they look a little bit messy on the top, it's okay because this will actually be the bottom. So into the oven, again, it's preheated to 375. I decided I want this coconut in a different bowl. This size of a bowl is really good for the glaze, but when I'm going to dip my donuts in this coconut, it's easier to even put it on a plate or a shallow bowl like this. So my coconut is ready again, and then I can just use this bowl for my coconut sugar glaze. I'm also going to be doing a honey butter glaze as well. If you saw the video for my sour cream almond cranberry cake, it's the same glaze that I put on that cake. It works out so delicious on that cake and also on these donuts. And all it is some melted butter and some honey. So we'll get to that in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is make some coconut sugar, powdered sugar. And this is just a magic bullet. I'll put a link below. And to make it easier on myself, that would probably go everywhere. So that is 1 cup of coconut sugar, and then this is 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. You could use tapioca starch, arrowroot powder. I've never tried it with potato starch before. So all we're going to do is just finely ground our coconut sugar. If you've used coconut sugar before, you know that it is kind of grainy and it doesn't exactly dissolve the way we want it to, especially for a glaze. And then adding this starch in here will also help thicken it up like a regular sugar glaze. Before I take the lid off, I just let it sit for a minute, kind of settle down. Regular powdered sugar kind of goes everywhere anyways, and this will too. If you don't have a magic bullet, a food processor, a blender, something like that, maybe even a spice grinder or coffee grinder, that would work too. But I find that this size just is the perfect amount. And of course, if you're using regular sugar and powdered sugar, then you would just make a regular powdered sugar glaze. And that would be, a few cups of powdered sugar and enough milk or water to get the right consistency. And that's also where, if you wanted to change the flavor of your glaze, you could use lemon juice or orange juice, or even, maple extract. That would give you kind of a maple flavored glaze. Something like that. And as with anything, is it exactly like powdered sugar? No. But it's a really good coconut powdered sugar. And even if it looks like there's a couple of little clumps, they break apart. And then I just have a mini whisk, and I forgot to get my milk out of the fridge. And this is something that I don't even have exact measurements. I mean, I do have the 1 cup of coconut sugar. But as for the milk, I just eyeball it till it's the right consistency that I'm looking for. So we'll just slowly stir and pour a little bit at a time. This is one of those things that's easier to add less milk because you can always add more. If it's too thick, then you just add a little bit more to thin it out. But if you add too much milk in the beginning and it's too thin, then you have to add more sugar and then just keep going back and forth. So this is looking really good. It's on the thicker side, which I don't want it to be this thick. But I'm going to set this aside, give this sugar a chance to absorb more of that milk, and then we can add a little bit more to thin it out. And while that's doing that, I can get my other honey butter glaze ready. I do want this butter to be melted. And then I've just got a pastry brush that I actually buttered my cake pans with. So this is ready to go. It already has some butter on it. Don't blow up your butter in the microwave. Perfect timing. And I actually have about 1 minute left on my donuts. So in my oven, it's 15 minutes, and then I usually test it with a toothpick. Everyone's oven is different. And of course, this is just honey and melted butter. When you brush it on a warm cake, it soaks in and gives it a little bit of extra sweetness, and it also creates a little bit of a crust, which is what a glaze does. And then I have another little mini whisk here. And the nice thing about this glaze is if it gets too firm, you just throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds or so till it's a liquid consistency again. So that's ready. Let me check on my coconut. And this is thickened up quite a bit. And there's my timer. So my donuts look really good. We're going to turn them out and let them cool off on a cooling rack. I really like them to stay crispy, but we don't want them to get soggy cooling off in the pan. And another reason I like to use the pastry bag is not on all of them, but on some of them you can get a smoother top or bottom to your donut. And then all we need to do is just flip it over and they come right out. And then of course move them over. Very hot. So if you were just using a spoon to put in your dough into your donut pan, you could dip your finger in water and just smooth down the dough so it doesn't look so craggy. And of course, do these look exactly like a cake donut? No, one of the signature things of a cake donut is they break and crack and get all craggly around the edges. But this is a gluten-free cake donut. So now that these are cooling off, I'm going to move these aside, get that on my hot pads, and then we'll come back to our glaze. And it's thickened up quite a bit. And I'm not going to add any extra milk to this right now. I feel like it's a really good consistency. The donuts are still a little bit warm. I've got my coconut sugar, my honey butter, and this has thickened up a little bit. But I do want to glaze my donuts while they're warm with the honey butter. And because they're still warm, it does melt and absorb in there. And with something like this, I don't like to dip the donut in. First of all, because they're hot. But second of all, you kind of end up with not an even coating. And I'm not worried about the bottom, mostly just the middle and the sides. It's a little bit messy. Once I get the first coat of this honey butter on my donuts, I can go back and do a little bit better of a job on the second coat because they're cool enough to handle, but still warm enough that they will absorb this honey and butter. But it's really forming a nice glaze. And I probably won't use all of my honey and butter. I usually only do, 3 coats of this butter and honey mixture. But you could do just 1 coat, however much you like. And of course, it doesn't harden up like a regular powdered sugar glaze does. But so delicious. And it really gives them a nice shine. But usually by the 3rd coat is when you can really see that there's a glaze on top, instead of just looking like a damp cake. Once your donuts are cooled off, we can start dipping them in our coconut glaze. I turn this around, give myself some room. And my coconut glaze, you could dip them in right now and it would be a really thick glaze, but I want it to be just a little bit thinner. So just a little bit more milk. It's kind of a balance. When I dip my donut in, I don't want all of the glaze to run off and make a mess of my coconut. You don't want it too thick, but you don't want it too runny. And the first one's kind of a challenge. So we'll just dip it in and then let the excess drip off. And coconut sugar, it looks almost like chocolate. And then into our coconut. And you can pat it around the sides just to get a nice even coat. There we go. Let's do another one. And the bottom of our donuts are not as golden brown, but that's all right. No one will see the bottom anyways. And then I'm going to do a couple of these, just the coconut sugar glaze. You don't even have to use toasted coconut for this. You could use just the regular white coconut, and while your honey and butter were still a little bit warm, sprinkle that on or dip it in. Let me wash up. In fact, maybe I will do a couple of these honey ones with some toasted coconut. But they sure look pretty. But let's get a little bit of extra honey and butter on a couple of these. They sure look good. Even though some of my donuts don't have a hole all the way through, that's all right. I put them in the fridge for a few minutes, and you can see my coconut sugar glaze is still staying shiny. And these other ones that are just the honey butter, they have a nice little shine to them, but certainly not really shiny, as you can see. If you flip them over, it doesn't exactly look like a donut. But from the top side, they really look good. So let's try one of our coconut donuts. I'm going to get a plate and a knife, just to save myself from a super big mess. Look at that. Looks like a cake donut, because it is a cake donut. Okay, let's give it a bite. So good. And even though it looks like a really sweet, desserty treat, it isn't that sweet. I mean, the dough itself, it's a little on the sweet side, but really not super sweet like a cake or a cookie. Such a great texture for a cake donut. And I've mentioned before, coconut sugar, even though it's sugar, it's really not super sweet. But I think using the coconut sugar as a glaze and the toasted coconut really gives this great coconut flavor. Let's break open one of these other ones. Not a super shiny glaze. Give this one a bite. Because we did a honey butter glaze, it does give a honey flavor, but so good. This is a really delicious gluten-free version of a cake donut. That cream of tartar in there adds just a little bit of something. And of course the nutmeg, not overpowering it all. Again, just a little bit of something. So delicious. And not overly sweet at all. Let me know what you think if you make this recipe. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.